Welcome to Staton the Obvious, where we dive into the truths about entrepreneurship that should be obvious but often aren't. I'm Geraud Staton, an entrepreneur trainer and life coach, here to guide you through the real stories of creativity, leadership, and the ups and downs of building a business. Each episode, we'll talk to inspiring guests who share their journeys and hard-earned lessons. My guest is Kristine Sloan, one of my dearest friends. Kristine does a lot in the entrepreneurial space. She grew up with entrepreneurial parents. She spends her professional time speaking and facilitating workshops and corporate learning experiences. She's also the executive director of Leadership Triangle, a nonprofit that builds leadership capacity and promotes regionalism through the Triangle here in North Carolina. Editing this podcast took 3 times longer than it normally would because we were cutting up and laughing like crazy, having a good time. But what you were left with is some incredible wisdom and insight into leadership development and social impact. So, let's get ready to learn from one of my dearest friends, Kristine Sloan. You've been a friend of mine what seems like
6 years.
Wow, what kind of Rain Man business is that? Are you cracking it?
6 years, 2018 to 2024. It's not that hard. 6.
I don't know that. Why do you know that?
Because we met in the fall of 2018. That's when I went and did the strategic planning with Helios.
But how's that just pop in your head like that?
Because it's a fact that I understand.
Numbers, dates, time? You good with time?
Sort of.
Huh. Well, 6 years. It feels like longer, which is awesome. Not in a bad way, like, what a drone.
Sure.
In a good way.
Yeah.
Anyway, Kristine, one of my dearest friends, and I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. I have no idea how this is going to get on. No,
Poorly for you, I think.
probably.
Hopefully the listeners get something good out of it, but it might be
I'm not
bad for you.
anticipating it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do the thing you're not supposed to do in a podcast.
That's a beer for everyone to understand.
I wish it were a beer. We should get a sponsorship from Waterloo.
Yeah, it's still a beer.
All of my
Just so yeah. Mm-hmm.
all of my guests get Waterloo except for you. We're getting coffee.
Yeah. Just so everyone knows, Gerard does not provide coffee to anyone. He's anti-coffee. You have to drink mushrooms if you're at his house.
Yeah,
Like not the
mushroom
good
coffee.
ones, the bad
Yeah, no,
mushroom.
not the. I think the other way around. Like the good mushrooms, not the bad seeing Tweety Birds mushrooms.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'm Kristine, Executive Director of Leadership Triangle. From the Triangle, I've been in leadership development for about a decade now. Prior to that, I worked in international development. I thought that was going to be my whole career. And then kept seeing people disrupt really good work. And so instead of doing direct service work, I decided I wanted to start working with people. That's what got me into leadership development. Also, I have a daughter named Louie. She's almost 2.
She's
She
adorable.
she's adorable. She consumes my brain functioning, the functioning part of my brain. I feel like it goes into being her parent. And so when I'm talking about myself now, it feels odd to just talk about my work self because that's like a small portion of what I do.
Here we're going to talk about just you because on this podcast we don't even like kids.
We don't.
So
You don't.
okay,
I
just
love them. Yeah. You love them. You just can't stand them. It's like a interesting
yeah.
piece of you. Yeah. You've like, oh, children. Great over there.
It's like a pool. Like I love if my neighbor has a pool, but I don't want a pool.
It's a lot to maintain.
I want to maintain.
Similar with children.
Or a classic car.
Honestly, similar with adults.
Yeah, that's also very true. Yeah, real true. Tell me about international development. What is that? People are like, oh, what do you mean? What are you teaching foreign languages? Are you building international businesses? What is that? Why'd you think it was going to be your thing?
I originally thought it was going to be my thing from a healthy place. I was coming of age in the moment of the AIDS crisis, particularly in South Africa. And I was seeing these commercials on TV, like very problematic commercials, but of children with flies on their face. And I remember talking to my parents, just, I've never been okay or comfortable with such inequity and injustice. And to me, this was like intolerable. I couldn't, you're a teenager, the world's kind of black and white. I was
Right.
like, this is very bad, must be fixed, right? So this very much just like white savior. I'm going to help people. I need to go do good stuff.
Yeah.
And then thankfully, I had a mentor early in my college career when I did my first study abroad in West Africa who told me something I'll never forget, which was as a white person, particularly from the United States, doing work abroad, your job here is not to come and figure out what you can solve or fix. Your job is to find out what's going well and put resources towards doing more. And that, for me, really guided how I thought about my career working abroad. And I founded a company in West Africa and then I ended up leading a company in East Africa that helped build artisan cooperatives.
What made you stop doing international development?
When I founded the company in West Africa, we were growing, we were scaling, we were doing quite well. I thought you know, I was about to move to West Africa to work full time. And then Ebola hit. And we did work we were doing. So my co-founder stayed and continued to do some of the work, and I pivoted and started looking for different positions, found the position based in East Africa and moved to East Africa. We're doing really good direct service work, building out these artisan cooperatives. We had launched 6 centers in different rural communities throughout the country of Burundi. And then the president of Burundi decided to run for a third term, which is illegal in the constitution of Burundi. And so there was a um, protest, uprising, violence, etc. And I left 2 weeks before they did a mandatory evacuation of all foreign personnel. Uh, Most of that work was based on import export, so things were getting out of the country. I just felt like these big systems failures were happening because, you know, in the case of the president running for the third term, large ego, commitment to power, even
Yeah.
over people. In West Africa, continuous defunding of social services, mostly by, again, people with power. And I felt like we weren't going to get anywhere on these issues if we didn't deal with like the ego thing, the desire for power, the how can you build system structures that promote a different kind of leadership.
I feel like we're glossing over something really important here, and that is that you started this huge international company.
It wasn't huge.
You're talking about 6 offices spread across different parts of West Africa. That's pretty big for a lot of people. Probably a lot of people listening to this, right? Like, talk about that part of it. It's like, this is something I'm assuming you didn't start as a teenager, but really, as a teenager, you were like, oh, there's a thing that someone needs to do something about. And then you went out and did it. That's actually a really big deal.
Yeah. Don't you think that a lot of entrepreneurship is this sense of if I don't do it, then it won't happen?
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Most of us are wrong,
Right. And I think
but
that,
those of us that are not wrong make big changes in the world.
yeah, and I was young enough and probably dumb enough to think, well, I'm just going to do it. I think also I prioritized relationships in my early career.
Mhm.
And so some of the people I met in West Africa when I went on a study abroad in college ended up being the person that I co-founded the company with in West Africa. And he was really clear on the vision that he had for the region and what he wanted to build. And I believed in that and I believed in him. And we built this thing together. We're still friends. But I think like you can do really big things if you're holding that, if you have relationships that are big enough, I
Yeah.
think. Like you can do a lot if you have good, solid relationships.
Yeah. The who's, they really matter. You're saying something that a lot of entrepreneurs have said that if they sat, plotted it out, seen how difficult it might be, they never would have done it. That ignorance, there is something to ignorance actually moving you forward. Do you agree with that?
Yes. And um I think that you're like ignorance about process, but I do think that people who build businesses that last
Hmm.
are very good at what they're building.
Yeah. Maybe it's a matter of your first business is just one of those things you jump into. And then I know for me, I had a number of small businesses that did fine, but as they did progressively better, there became this addiction. So at that point, no matter how hard it would have gotten, there was still this feeling of your own success doing the thing that you set out to do. In some instances, the money is better, your control is more. And so, but I think probably for me, even if I'd known how difficult, like my first official business was a pet sitting business. It was a lot of work that I did for 3 years before I sold it. And I sold it not because I was like, ooh, exit strategy, but because I was tired of it, because it
Yeah.
was really, really hard.
Yeah.
But I sold it. And then, like, oh, I'm a businessman. Like, that was really exciting for me. Did you feel any of that at all? I mean, you started businesses after that. And so, was it because you just found another mission or because you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
Do you feel like I heard you say this desire to like be in control?
Hmm.
Do you feel like that most entrepreneurs are have a high need for control?
Yes, most of them that I know, almost, I wouldn't say to a person, but I would say a high 80% of them have said, yeah, I don't think I can work for anyone else, or I always think that I can do it better, or I want to have more control. That seems to be even more than the money. In fact, I know a lot of entrepreneurs who have said, yeah, I can make more money if I do it this way, but then I got to bring in a partner, I got to bring in more staff, and they just don't want to. They'd rather go to their kids' recitals or go fishing or whatever than to, and not to say that they don't work 40, 50, even 60 hours, but those hours get to revolve around typically when they want to. And also, most of the entrepreneurs I know don't actually work 60 hours unless they are counting thinking in the shower as work,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that hard work is usually a lot less than that because they want the space. I think if you're an entrepreneur and you're just going to work 60, 70 hours, you just go work corporate somewhere and do the same thing for more money.
Yeah, I feel like my issue with the traditional workplace environment is like the system just seems so dumb to
Hmm.
me. Like there's no real reason anybody can articulate to me that we need to work 9 to 5 each day. There's no
Right.
real reason anyone can articulate to me that I need to file this whatever report for just bureaucracy's sake.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe I'm just ornery or unwilling to do things that I think are particularly silly.
Yeah.
And that has led me into places where I am like seeking an environment that I can either create or that I feel like, oh, this is an environment for innovation, an environment that's not like prioritizing what I see as bullshit, even over doing something that matters.
Yeah.
And I think if I had found companies or spaces that were leaning into that, that were more innovative in their practices, then I would have been like more, it would have been easier for me to not be the organizational leader, but I feel like I've had to create those spaces.
Yeah.
And so being the leader, being the founder, being whatever has enabled me to have that environment and still do good work.
Yes. I agree with that 100% because I think that the good work matters,
Hmm.
but there is still a price. Like I am pretty certain that if you said, "Oh, you can go work for this company, they do amazing, like just amazing, world water for the world or something like these big organizations making change, but to do it." You got to be a cog in the wheel. You got to do your TPS reports. Like everything is very structured in a way. I'd be like, well, we don't need good work, I guess, and I would just rather not, right? I think there is that price is that freedom and flexibility and personal control. Not even it's good to say that some things that are bullshit we can do without. And I'll be totally honest, some of it is just that I want to do it whenever I want to do it. And
Hmm.
so having a thing that is due on Thursday, and then I think, oh, but you're not even in town. You're not going to look at it until you get back on Wednesday. So why is this such an emergency now? The
Yep.
moment I feel that, I check out. Then I think, oh, now I have to question all the rules. Like this one's not real. Are any of these real? Is this just a someone else trying to control all of us for no real reason other than
Hmm.
it? And now I can't bother. So I have to be that person in control, but I also try not to implement all those things because I think they're silly from the top
Yeah,
too.
I agree.
But that might mean that I can never run an organization that is 27 offices, international across the world, or maybe I can, but it feels like, the bigger and bloated you get, the more those processes need to be in place.
So there's a company in China called Hire, and
Hmm.
they're really interesting. They're huge. They make most of the kitchen appliances, like household appliances, and they have a fully distributed workforce, very minimal bureaucracy. One of the things that they allow employees to do is to pitch new products. They can build their own product teams within the company itself. They can fully bring that product to market. If it fails, then they have to dissolve the team and join a new team. But if it succeeds, then they can kind of build out that product team, and anybody in the company can start and launch any new product. And it's huge. Right. So I do think there are these really interesting examples of large companies embracing that spirit through how they're structured. And that is really exciting to me. I didn't know about those companies when I was starting in my career.
No,
So I was
not at
just like, well,
all.
I have to just form it myself. Right.
Yeah.
I also think, especially in the international development space, it's so problematic in so many ways. Um, there are people who just say, I have a good idea and I'm going to go do it. And these are the like Tom shoes, whatever.
Hmm.
And actually, the impact is so negative. So I feel like what has been compelling to me in that space is who's an entrepreneur who's from that area,
Yes.
who sees a key need, and how can others give that person resources to do what they feel they need for their community, less the individuals coming in and having ideas. Like there's just so many problems with that. Those kinds of startups are not the ones that have received large funding. So that's another reason why I was like, okay, I'm done here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's true. There's not a lot of those large nonprofits in particular or NGOs that you hear that are doing great work without any major repercussions. Like a lot of them, because they're people coming from the outside,
Yeah.
lots of major repercussions. There was one that I heard that was really good, and I'm never going to remember the name, so I will have my assistant, which is just future me,
Mhm.
look it up. But there was an
Thank you, future
organization.
Geraud.
Yeah, yeah, he does good work sometimes. I might have to let him go though. But they do. They have small villages and things, I think, throughout India, and I want to say I don't remember what parts of Africa, but a couple of countries in Africa. And so they have them doing milk, like
Hmm.
making milk containers and things like that. But they're like, we'll just give you guys cow, like here, take cows, you can have them, you can farm them, you can do other stuff as long as you give us our quota. And that quota is relatively generous, apparently. And so these villages get farm animals, or they can use them for crops and things like that. And I thought that seems like the sort of thing where they took the locals and asked what they wanted and made something that was actually good for everyone. Tom's Shoes, I know they feel bad about being the example of like, oh, they started with such a what a great premise that is.
Yeah.
Oh no, terrible. Like
Yeah.
it's so terrible for so many things, but that's what happens sometimes when you just, oh, I got an idea and you just run and do it.
Right. That's the leadership piece, I think, too. It's
Yeah.
like, who else have you talked to about said idea?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've talked about that even locally. So one of my friends, I should probably remain nameless for now, but started an art gallery, and she's talked about it publicly herself. But I'll invite her on the show; she can talk about it. But started an art gallery in a relatively lower economic neighborhood, and then just like, oh, they need art here too, and so brought it in really inexpensive, gave a high percentage of the sales to the artists as opposed to like the usual 30, 40, 50%, like gave like 80 or 90% to them, but took very little. Um, and didn't really ask anyone in the neighborhood whether it was a great idea or if they wanted her there or not. And it turns out they did not for various reasons. And so she said, yeah, looking like we moved to some place, did our due diligence and moved to a different place, but this never occurred to ask the people
Yeah.
what they thought. So
Yeah.
that is sort of one of the issues with just running and doing it. I've done it myself. I took a part of my organization, Helios. We moved to Rocky Mount.
Mhm.
Someone said, "Oh, you should come to Rocky Mount. I have people in my church that really could use your services." Okay, and then I did, and I just went in, guns just blazing, and had 5 or 6 people reach out within the first week and saying, we've been putting together a group to do this already. Like we've been, and of course my vanity was like, well, I don't know why you took so long. Like I just moved in and started doing it, but it still turned out I stepped on some toes.
Mm.
And then you don't get the support that you might need from locals, so it could be shitty.
Or you build competition where you were not looking for it.
Yep.
Yeah, you're like, I'm the first to enter this market. And the market's like, no,
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 no.
you're not.
There's a couple of us here, and now war happens.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's terrible. You got into individual leadership, what you call it, after international?
Just leadership development. When I came back, I took a sabbatical. I like bought a van, lived in it, did that thing.
Do we
And
call that a sabbatical, or were you just homeless for a little while?
it's both.
Sure,
Yeah, I
yeah,
had a home. It was my van.
I like
Her
it.
name was Janice.
Janice the Van.
Yeah, after Joplin, Janis Joplin, my little free spirit baby.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So me and Janice, no,
White van?
yeah, white electrician's van, Dodge Ram 2500. There were only 2 windows, and I spray painted them out so nobody could see in. It was creepy as fuck.
You couldn't see out.
I mean, sorry, there was a windshield,
Well,
but
no,
it
no,
doesn't
I know
matter.
that. That's not, but
No, I couldn't see out. Absolutely not. No. Safety, even over any level of enjoyment of surroundings.
that's fair.
Also, if I wanted to just open up the back door,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was at actually funny story in Yellowstone, and there were 2 women trying to hitchhike through the park. So I was like, okay, well, I'll pick them up. And I pulled over in the van, and they didn't see me. So they just saw this creepy van pull over, and it was like, it had like rust on my van, whole situation. And they like stopped walking and were like kind of backing away. And then I popped out and I'm like, hey, do you need a ride? And they're like, oh God. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I have. You have someone else in the back there? Like,
hmm Can you open up the van so we can see
mhm.
what you got going on back
So you
there?
got any chains back there?
Yeah.
How long was
Um,
your sabbatical? Your
it was 3
sabbatical.
months. It wasn't very long, but I found an organization I like to work there called Starting Block. They did leadership development for people in social impact, social entrepreneurs, and social justice leaders. and was there for 5 years before I started at Leadership Triangle.
Which is where I met. Well, I met you at Starting Block when you were
Yep.
still at Starting Block. Yeah. Um, we came to do some consulting for my fledgling organization. Were we still fledgling? I guess we're in the middle of stuff.
Yeah.
I guess that was 6 years ago. Then that would have been, yeah,
We
five
were about
years
to grow.
in. Yeah, yeah. Um, yes, and I was absolutely impressed. I had an impressive board, and you managed to heard them talk all the strategic stuff that we needed, get everybody on the same page. That was really big because that was a group of people with a lot of their own ideas, just going in a lot of different directions, including me. So that was awesome. So that's how I met you. Tell me a little bit about Starting Block because I found the idea of Starting Block fascinating. And you might not know this, but I stole some stuff from it.
What'd you steal?
Tell us about it first. Yeah, what's up? Maybe I'll tell you.
So Starting Black is a fundamentally a fellowship program founded on the belief that individuals who wanted to do good in the world needed community, and that it was around since 2003, founded by like a group of young people. Definitely had a younger 20s, I would say, early 30s. Um, Focus in terms of age. How do
Hmm.
you get people plugged into that community so they can stay in social impact for longer because the work is really hard? How can you help social entrepreneurs gain access to networks, gain access to funding that they may not otherwise have access to? And yeah, global and scale. The fellows came from 52 different countries, but we brought them in through these 5-day institutes. So it was like a 5-day conference,
Yeah.
basically. At the end of the conference, they became a fellow, and then they were a fellow for life. And yeah, I mean, I'm still astounded by the other week. I was at a conference, and someone came up to me and they were, I'm starting this barbershop nonprofit, and I'm working with barbers to provide mental health services to their customers as this key kind of tenant in the community. And I was thinking to myself, do you know Lorenzo Lewis? He has kind of launched this movement across the country. Well, Lorenzo is a starting block fellow who came to our institute, came into the fellowship when he was just kind of starting the Confess Project. And I remember people really like attaching themselves to his idea and have he's now wildly successful. I think he maybe has like a Netflix documentary. I don't know. Um, but those kind of threads come back to me
Hmm.
often where I'm talking to someone and they're like, oh, this is a really cool model. And then I'm like, oh, this came from a starting block person.
Yeah.
So that is really nice to continue to have that legacy of that community. And I think there's just the starting block's ability to find and resource people over time, like the community it built was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so
So
what'd you steal?
there are two things. One that we didn't particularly do very well. And that was so the first was we had fellows always, but our fellowship program was meant to get in, get out.
Hmm.
Like we weren't, my goal was to mitigate any failures that you might have. So come in, cram as much business school as I could into you, and then you would take your successful business and then go run free. And if you ever started another business, you could take all the stuff I'd already taught you and just have it. It was the idea of building a community around that was new for me. And
Mm,
so I thought, oh shit, that's actually a really good idea for all the entrepreneurs to. Entrepreneurship is lonely.
quiet.
And so if we could build a network in this community of entrepreneurs that would just come in, come to talks, give a talk, have events, and just constantly be surrounded by other entrepreneurs. I thought that seemed like that worked really well. We weren't really good at galvanizing people. It turns out most of the entrepreneurs that I worked with, what they wanted was the coach, someone to give them insight. They didn't actually want the community. And that was a surprise to me. But
Mm,
I tried it. I tried it for a long time. And they would say, oh, it's so nice to be in this cohort together. But as soon as class was done and they would say, let's all stick together, let's reach out to each other, they did not.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah.
And when you would have an event, 20% of them would show up. And so, yeah, I realized that community wasn't necessarily the thing, but man, we tried for a few years. We tried that. Um, and then the other one, the thing that we did do is we altered our fellowship a little bit so that it was fellowship for life. Because again, I was kicking people out of the program once they were done. But at some point, we decided, all right, once you're a fellow, you can come back. If you had a question, come back in, come talk to us, like, and just would always be there. Because at some point we'd even stop tracking people. Like you go through the program and are successful, great, all right, now go fly. We don't need to track you anymore. We stopped doing that and made sure we kept track of everyone, sent them newsletters and any events that were going on, and gave them discounts to stuff that was happening. And so that really made a big difference for us. So.
Mhm.
Yeah. Steal.
I
All the
mean,
things
I
that
didn't
work.
found starting blocks, so I, yeah. I think what was really interesting about starting block, and I've seen this in Leadership Triangle as well, is because it was started as a place to build community,
Hmm.
people applied maybe to get the fellow title, like, oh, I want to be a starting block fellow. But most people, the vast majority of people applied because they were looking for that community.
Yeah.
And so they were coming in the door wanting that. And then when they finished the institute, we had online spaces, we had in-person gatherings, we had tons of opportunities for them to stay engaged. And the numbers were like bananas for a community. If you're going to consider it like a quote alumni community,
Yeah.
75% of 3,200 fellows engaging once a month or more. Like,
Seriously?
yeah. And it was a lot to be a part of. And then when I became a CEO, it was a lot to manage. That's a lot of engagement.
It's a lot.
It's a lot of people with a lot of opinions. But like, I think that's what so many different fellowships, community programs, whatever, are really trying to build. And I think it was that orientation from the start. And then we had all these different ways that we like layered in the existing cultural norms as people were coming into the fellowship. And so it was just this expectation set really clearly. You will show up, you will engage, you will volunteer, you will come back, you will mentor, you will. And so yeah, it was fascinating. I learned a ton
That is
in that
awesome.
organization.
You're in Leadership Triangle now,
Mhm.
also did not found, but still, you probably more than most people I know, including some entrepreneurs, really, it's an entrepreneurial endeavor for you. Like, how is entrepreneurship, how does it play a role in your life, particularly in what you do right now?
So when I came to Leadership Triangle, I think the organization had the board, from my understanding, a couple questions going. One, Leadership Triangle had been running 2 to 3 programs a year
Hmm.
for about 27 years at that point. Um, the board was asking, do we want to still do this? Like, is this why Leadership Triangle started? Leadership Triangle was founded in 1992 by a group of community members who were like, we we did Leadership Durham, we did Leadership Raleigh. We think that's great, but we live life regionally. It seems like a lot of these issues are regional. How can we kind of build our capacity to address those regional issues? And over time, we did our cohorts, we did all these things, but it felt like in some ways, I think Leadership Triangle got away from that original intent, which was like,
Mm,
how do you activate a community around the issues that matter most to that community?
yeah.
And so I think the board was in this place of, do we keep doing the cohort thing? Is that really useful? Or could we like imagine what might be different or what might be next, or how Leadership Triangle could build new things that would be supportive to the ecosystem? And I guess there was like a few candidates, and basically I was well, she'll just throw a bunch of ideas on the table and like help to grow the thing person, which I'm really grateful that I was hired for that, because I think a lot of times in Leadership Triangle is a 501c3 nonprofit, in that kind of structure, you can run up against the no, seems too risky,
Yes.
seems hard. And our board was not there. Our board was in the space of like, well, we're kind of bored of doing the same thing. Can you try some new stuff?
Yeah, you can curse on this podcast.
Okay. And so, um, it's like, we've been able to, like, in the last 4 years, we've tripled our annual budget. We used to run 2 programs a year. We have 4 cohorts running right now. We're going to do 6 this year. We just launched this morning a collaborative of leaders working on housing. We're going to support them over the next 6 to 12 months, partnered with Activate Good to build that, uh, really trying to activate existing leaders to make a regional progress on this key issue. So all of that to me is like, oh, it's like all these different little businesses that we're launching and starting and experimenting and playing with within the structure of Leadership Triangle. And so it's been really fun, really fun.
You think you'd ever start your own organization?
And I have my own LLC on the side. I do some stuff. I don't want to say no, I'll never start my own organization, or no, I wouldn't leave my own company, but I think with Leadership Triangle as the example, when you have um, an institutional player,
Mhm.
like I wouldn't see a reason to build something that would be competitive with Leadership Triangle when
Yeah.
Leadership Triangle is already there, right?
Yep.
Leadership Triangle has good brand reputation. So many people have been through the programs, and they really like, I think you can take the energy of being an entrepreneur and put it into an existing institution that maybe needs to change or needs to adapt or needs to like shake things up. And there is in some ways even more potential there. Sometimes you just start some shit and do your own
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But like the I think the history and the rootedness of Leadership Triangle actually enables us to be really creative in ways that if I were just coming in and saying like to address housing, people would be like, who the hell are you?
Yeah.
Right? But Leadership Triangle, oh, that makes sense. That's why you've been working on this kind of stuff for 30 years.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. We've talked about that in some. You and I have talked about it. I know we've talked about that in some of these podcast episodes. That's probably one of the things that everyone has had in common, where they are not trying to compete with other organizations. I think some derivative of the blue ocean versus Red Sea sort of thing,
Mm,
which I think we talked about in Leadership Triangle. But for people who don't know, in business, which one is better? If your competition are sharks and you are yourself are a shark, do you want a blue ocean where you can go feed wherever you want, but also you're not 100% certain that there are fish there?
mm,
Or do you want a Red Sea where all the sharks are feeding? You know there's fish, you may or may not get any. And so typically people are looking at a blue ocean for a place like, you know what, it'll take some work, but when I find a school, it's mine, at least for a little bit. And
mm.
so most of the entrepreneurs that we've talked to are that. They're like, if someone's already doing it, we don't need to do it. If there is some difference sometimes when someone is doing something and they're doing a shitty job of it,
Yeah.
then sometimes it's
Yeah,
sort of
definitely.
our place to, okay, you're not really helping. Now I will help, and you're not going to let me help you do this. So now competition has to come about, right? But most of them, when they find someone that's doing good in their whatever their field is, they shift fields or they go someplace else. And so I think that's really cool. That's just been a running theme for everyone now.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I do think that like healthy competition piece is important because you can have these like long-standing institutional players that do so much harm, but nobody comes into the market with a new idea because they're like, well, they've garnered the market. And it's like, yeah, they have the market, but that's only because people don't have a choice.
Yeah, the second there's a choice, people will take it.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we see that in energy, cable, around here. The internet stuff has been kind of crazy. So
Mhm.
yeah, we've had one player for a long time, and then people were like, man, if anyone else would show up, and then when someone did, people jumped ship real
Fast.
fast. So
Mhm.
great, we've talked more than we were meant to, but I'm not surprised even a little bit. You are awesome. Has been great.
What's like your most...
Thank you for tuning in to Staton the Obvious. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend who might find it helpful. You can follow us on Instagram at Staton the Obvious for updates and bonus content, or you can go to my website at lumiere-strategies.com. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing forward.